Thank you for joining How Chinese Consumers Are Embracing Sustainability with Chris Tung, CMO of Alibaba Group, and Jue Wang, CEO of Olaplex. As a reminder, if you have any questions, to please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now here's your host, Deborah Weinswig, CEO and founder of Coresight Research.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Mara. So as we look at China, they've been some very ambitious carbon neutrality goals, and the country is currently undergoing a real movement towards greener consumption. We've seen that from our colleagues, from the companies we work closely with, and really just through a lot of conversations that we've had. You know, Chinese consumers are really the driving force behind the world's largest online retail market. And, the shift of their buying habits towards, more sustainable choices can really have significant implications for the path towards a carbon neutral future. And, it's this idea that, really every little thing that you do does add up to have a significant impact on the world. We've also seen huge progress in green finance in China, and something that we at Coresight are very focused on as China's green finance development continues to accelerate. For example, in January of 22, the number of green bonds issued was 4 times that of the same period in 21. Also, we're seeing the formulation of national strategies for coordinating climate change and biodiversity protection, and these topics really are very closely linked. Lastly, in the vein of being au courant, today I'm in San Diego, California at the ULI, or Urban Land Institute spring meeting. And today it was discussed how there's a big focus on the formulation of mixed land use policies, really conducive to large-scale development of renewable energy, which I actually first heard about in China. And so, we're starting to see some of this kind of head towards the US as well. So as we turn our focus to today's topic at hand, I'm very honored to be here with Chris Tung, Chief Marketing Officer of Alibaba Group, and Jue Wang, CEO of Olaplex, to discuss the role that e-commerce platforms can play in advancing green consumption, and how are brands sharing their commitment to sustainability with their consumers in China. With that, I'll turn the floor over to Chris to explain how Alibaba is keeping green practices at the core of its values. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Deborah. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. China is experiencing a green movement right now. The country has pledged ambitious goals to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. A recent Accenture survey showed 77% of Chinese consumers said that the environment is becoming a critical priority. Against this backdrop, we are well positioned to make a significant impact with millions of merchants and 1 billion consumers on our platform. This is consistent with our mission to make it easy to do business anywhere. The breadth of our ecosystem, including e-commerce, cloud computing, logistics, etc., creates a unique opportunity for us to reduce carbon emissions, not only for ourselves, but among our stakeholders throughout the value chain. How are we taking steps to achieve this? We started with creating a sustainability framework appropriate to our role and influence. We aspire to go beyond the current international standards. We have many touch points with our brands and consumers as a platform company. Thus, we have defined Scope 3 Plus that extends beyond the standard carbon neutrality goals, including Scope 1, 2, 3, of course, to influence the broader participants in our digital ecosystem. By working with merchants and consumers, we aim to slash carbon emissions by 1.5 gigatons across our digital ecosystem by 2035. Here are some specific examples of how we are leveraging our different touch points with brands and consumers to promote sustainability in China. On Tmall, we partner with brands to incentivize green consumption in dedicated channels. During last year, Double 11, which is the largest shopping holiday in China, Tmall featured a green consumption channel to spotlight sustainable products. Recently, we also piloted carbon emission labeling on Tmall's product pages to help shoppers make more sustainable decisions. The initiative started with the electronics category and is expanding to others. Today, Tmall has categorized over 300,000 energy-efficient home appliances from 3,000 merchants. On the re-commerce front, our Idlefish is China's most popular re-commerce platform with hundreds of millions of users. It helps Chinese consumers to repurpose 1 billion pre-owned items every year, including clothing, accessory, home appliances, and even rare collectibles. In time, our department store chain is now offering electronic receipt. It is a very clever way to attract younger customers. In times, research showed young customers have a stronger awareness of green consumption. Our navigation app, AMAP, encourages users to choose more sustainable ways of traveling, such as prioritizing public transits. When they opt in a greener way to travel, they are rewarded with points that can be redeemed for benefits in our ecosystem. During the 12 months ending September 21st, the app recorded 4.2 billion eco-friendly trips.
Thanks so much, Chris. Joy, can we hear about Olaplex's focus on sustainability and the initiatives that you have there?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Chris, for sharing, what Alibaba is doing, because it is definitely very encouraging. And Deborah, thank you for having me as well. So at Autoplexs, unlike Alibaba, we are a much smaller organization and we are more consumer facing. So one of the first things we do is we look at what we call our secondary packaging. So we want to reduce packaging, make sure that our plastic use is also being controlled. And then most importantly, how do we communicate that to the consumer to make them feel proud of being part of the ecosystem that we are trying to build? So first and foremost, by not using secondary packaging since our founding in 2014, we have been able to document from that time to the end of December 31st, 2021. As a company, we are able to document and say through an independent paper board to say that we save something like 35 million gallons of water from being wasted. We prevented 57 million pounds of greenhouse gas from being emitted into the environment and 44,000 trees from being deforested. The other thing that we are very aware of is that while plastics are recyclable, a lot of packaging are, but only 9% of plastics are truly recycled and reused. So one of the things that we are very aware of is to how do we combine with highly social impact non-profit organizations to really offset what we call our carbon footprint in that regard. So we will continue to be very mindful of that. And I think, Deborah, when we were just talking, you mentioned the 3 Rs, the repurpose, the reuse, and the recycle. So we will continue to look at that, and which dovetails very nicely with what Chris just mentioned about repurposing as well on the Idlefish app.
Thanks, Jue. Chris, as we look at the landscape in China and think about kind of what the sustainable landscape looks like and how that's changed over time, can you maybe give us, some perspective in terms of, your views and how Alibaba looks at this idea of sustainable consumption?
Education is critical. A recent study from PwC said 41% of Chinese consumers now think they lack eco-friendly options. And that is the biggest barrier to embracing sustainability. And I think it's a huge opportunity for brands that want to drive sustainable growth in China. E-commerce platforms have to communicate with consumers about the product's environmental impact. That is why we're working to spotlight more sustainable products on our platform. As I mentioned, we have included carbon emission labeling and green channels on Tmall to educate our consumers. For example, I recently bought some Olaplex conditioners because I learned from its Tmall global store that the brand uses recycled plastic from the ocean, which is super attractive to me. I'm sure it's attractive to a lot of users that embrace the sustainability concept. Also, sustainable brands are also leveraging tools like live streaming to communicate with their consumers. The sustainable shoe brand, Rothy's, often invite their consumers as key opinion consumers, KOCs, to join live streaming sessions to tell their brand stories. And when knowing the options, Chinese consumers do embrace brands with sustainable ethos. Shoe brands like Allbirds, Rothy's, and drinkware brand Clean Canteen, the UK tea brand Teapigs, and the Parisian beauty brand La Bouche Rouge are some examples I can think of that has delivered sustainable value and have early success on our platforms. But it's important to know that Chinese consumers are among the most sophisticated in the world. When they choose sustainable products, they also maintain high standard for quality designs and the functionality. But I think the sustainability value is something they are really looking for.
Chris, you hit on many things that I think about. So number one, right, the Chinese consumer, I think, is sophisticated because they really do educate themselves. And what we see is that it takes 12 touch points for the Chinese consumer to convert versus 4 in the West, because there's so many more resources for them to consume as they're making decisions. I think you also bring up something else that's very interesting, which is that, right, sustainability shouldn't need to cost the consumer more. And to me, by definition, sustainable, right, if you're using more resources to make a product that's more sustainable, that doesn't really make a lot of common sense. And I think that from Alibaba's perspective, right, there is this idea around kind of sharing kind of information and education and helping retailers and brands understand what, you know, kind of the best sustainable business practices are. So Jue, as we look at Olaplex, and you've really always, I think in your DNA, you've always really been very focused on sustainability and how to kind of share best practices with others. And once again, thanks for being here for, you know, with us today. What trends are you seeing from the Chinese consumer perspective?
Yeah, I think as what Chris said, they are highly, engaged. They are very interested, and that's why education and sharing of information is so important. What we have realized is that we can talk about it a lot, but as soon as we are able to document by product how much they are actually saving in terms of a carbon footprint when they buy each product, it becomes almost like a game. And they will sort of say, if I buy one and it saves, me, or it saves the environment 0.7 gallons of water and it's 0.4 pounds of greenhouse gas. So if they want to save 3 pounds, they can't work out how many pieces they will need to buy. And I think that engagement and that curiosity and that eagerness to really adopt and do the right thing has been very gratifying for brands like ourselves, because we are able to communicate in a way that they want to receive it. And I think, again, Deborah, you mentioned it, while we were having conversations earlier. There are a lot of sustainable actions that the Chinese population has been doing that has now come to the forefront in the Western world. So if you think about it, years ago when I started as a commodities trader, I would go to meetings, and every Chinese person that walks through, a business executive, they will walk in with their thermos flask with hot water, and they're pouring it into a cup, and they're drinking it from the flask, which is the cup of the cover of the flask. Today, everybody is carrying their Yanti mugs or jugs as if like it's the newest thing. But that was like 30 years ago, they were already doing it. So I feel like really what is old is new again. And because it's part of that DNA, I find that it's easier for me to try to get our distributor, while working on the cross-border Tmall global cross-border platform, to have this kind of conversations and engagement, and the return is very visible.
You bring up something very important. I was meeting with a dear friend of mine about 2 weeks ago who had come to the US from China, and we were talking about, she's a chief sustainability officer of a large brand there. And she said, right, in China, right, the consumer is asking for these numbers, right? They want to understand how their purchase is having an exact impact. And she was just very confused. She was like, how in the West, how does the consumer, right? They want to buy more sustainable, but what does that really mean to them? And it was a great question. And I think that when you, as the consumer, you can gamify, right? If I buy this and this, that I can have this impact, and then that means something to you. I think that that's a real difference. And there's a pride in terms of purchasing. So as we look at that and we think about some of these differences, Joy, how does this impact the Olaplex strategy in China as this consumer is really looking to understand how can they really do good? And they want to take ownership of that. How does that start to change the story and the landscape and what Olaplex does?
And I think that is really a great question. That is partnering, with very progressive business partners and commercial relevant partners like Alibaba, on the Tmall global platform. Because when you have a retailer that really wants to expand on that progress, a brand like us finds it a lot more easy, because then you have a facilitator who's going to give you that megaphone, so to speak, to use. And so for us, what is important is to leverage whatever Alibaba's sort of resources are, so that we can then amplify whatever the Chinese consumers feel like is most relevant to them. Because at the end of the day, we are not trying to sell to the Chinese consumers, we are serving them. And if we don't serve them the right things, they're not going to want it.
Actually, a very, I think, interesting way to look at it. And I think that it goes back to, right, from a customer service perspective, if it's this idea of serving versus selling, it's a completely different relationship as well. And so, Chris, as we turn to you, why does a platform like Alibaba have a unique role in promoting sustainability in China? And how do you think about that?
Yeah, there are three ways to look at our platform role. First, a platform like ours has tremendous convening power. The way we connect with millions of merchants and 1 billion consumers makes us uniquely positioned to move the needle in promoting green consumption. Second, the diversity of digital tools we have, such as marketing cloud solutions and logistics, enable our partners to go green. For example, our logistic arm, Cainiao, has built up a global green supply chain for merchants and the brands to reduce carbon footprints. Cainiao has reduced the size of its electronic shipping labels on parcels, saving 400 billion pieces of paper. Its bonded warehouses recently started using energy generated by a solar panel on the roof. Our cloud solutions have helped our customers to achieve energy efficiency. These include our liquid cooling data centers and other technologies that deliver high performance with lower power consumption. Last but not least, we're taking bold actions to mobilize resources that may set a direction for the sector. Last February, we issued a $1 billion sustainability bond. The fund was dedicated to 12 key projects, like constructing green data centers and energy efficient buildings, and so on. It was the first of its kind initiative in China's technology sector. This is a testament of our sustainability commitments.
Now that's really helpful, and I think we are seeing this focus in China on investing in not only kind of existing assets, but also as new ones are put into the ground, and that I think the funding of that is really critical, and also the explanation. So thank you, Chris. Jue, how is Olaplex working with Alibaba to promote your sustainability efforts? And how have you learned from them along the way? Because it seems to me that there's just, even from this brief conversation with Chris, right, the amount of opportunity to learn from Alibaba and focus on the China business, but also to learn and then focus on business in the West. There's just this tremendous learning opportunity that I'm sure you get to participate in on an almost daily basis. But how is Alibaba helping you with your role around sustainability?
I think first of all, the ability to be partners with such a progressive thought leader, that is helpful on its own, on a transactional basis. But then even on a basis of understanding how they are applying in all of those green consumption opportunities, whether it's in the supply chain, in the networking, digital networking space, and then in the communication to the end consumer, those are learnings that we can take back, wherever it can be. It doesn't have to be just, within the Chinese ecosystem. But then I think because we learn it from where, we have really want to focus on growth, because Chris just mentioned 1 billion consumers. I mean, this is not a small group of people that are not only engaged, but very energized in wanting to do the right thing. I mean, it is the first nation, I would say, that has used the mobile phone for virtually everything. I mean, I remember in 2015, when I was first with the Elizabeth Arden team, and we were switching from a lot of brick and mortar into digital, I was wondering, how is it that nobody is afraid that their identity is going to get stolen? They do their social, their banking, their connection, everything on their mobile phone. Fast forward into by 2019, all of us in the West cannot think of living without it. So just by learning how they reduce some of the energy consumption and really help with cloud computing, as Chris mentioned, are just ways for us to try to get better and more efficient, not necessarily better, but more efficient at what we do. And I think as the Chinese consumer research about brands that are not only focused about products on their own, but really being responsible, as you mentioned, Deborah, not just doing well, but doing good, then I think that brand differentiates itself. And that's something that Olaplex really wants to be, that we are more than just a product, but that we are also a lifestyle that the Chinese consumers can identify with.
I think that that's really critical, and it is interesting on social media in China. We do see, right, there is the consumer, and whether it's the key opinion customer who's helping others understand how their purchases can have a direct impact. So you feel like you have a greater role in the sustainability, I think, is very important to the consumers. And so, Chris, how do you kind of help the brands and retailers on the platform understand their role in sustainability, and how can Alibaba have this unique role in promoting sustainability in China?
As I mentioned, Alibaba is a commerce infrastructure company. We enable brands and merchants on our platform. Brands have many ways to join hands with us to shape their sustainability agenda, not just limit to selling their products with us. Our partnership with Unilever is one example. We help them rolling out green shelf space throughout our platforms. We also launched joint marketing campaigns to promote a greener lifestyle. We plan to launch more than 1,000 AI-powered plastic recycling machines at the university campuses across China. For Nestle, another example, Cainiao partnered with them to roll out a green supply chain, including packaging recycling, smart inventory allocation, and a smart packaging algorithm. We have been developing a green alliances for brands since last Double 11. It calls for merchants to be more responsive to sustainable trends and deploy greener ways to operate. So Julie, I hope Olaplex can join this effort as well. There's more we can do together.
Absolutely. And that's exactly, what I think we need to be more responsive to as well, because I think there's always that inkling of chasing one, program after another. But if we can incorporate every program, every live streaming, every opportunity that we are taking the message to the consumer, that we also incorporate, that DNA of sustainability, then you amplify that messaging so much more, and everybody wins in doing the right thing.
Julie, have you, through different technology solutions or whatnot, how have you found this opportunity to educate? And what technologies are you seeing to help kind of power this green consumption idea?
Yeah, I think a couple of ways. So one of the things that we have always seen is that you bring it down to a message that is most personable to a consumer or to a company or to a brand, where they can understand what it is. So I remember that when we first started talking about the ESG programming, most people were kind of saying, this is very lofty, this is a very huge goal. But when we started looking at what we were doing very specifically, that was very common to our DNA, which was that secondary reduction of that secondary packaging, then it became very palatable. And everybody kind of say, look, I can do this. I understand what you're asking of me. And then when we look at it, another layer, which is on plastic, as I mentioned right from the get-go, where all of us, yes, we try to use recycled plastic. You'll be hard-pressed today to find a brand not using that. But unfortunately, only 91% of plastic only 9% of plastics that are recycled are actually being reused. So there has to be ways for us to try to offset that carbon footprint. So in terms of technology, it is partnering with, there is a platform that in the US that we are working with that also has a Western Europe band to it, which is called EcoVadis. And what it does is that it does a social audit up and down the supply chain to help companies be responsible from their manufacturing to their procurement to their raw materials purchasing. And then when you manufacture, how do you limit and save on energy and not waste in terms of managing waste, so to speak. So I think by looking at that, having the packaging considerations, and then looking at, I think one of the things that we really have to get to is how do we have social impact programs to try to offset the plastic situation that is happening. And so I'm very glad to hear, from Chris that there are recycling opportunities throughout university campuses. And when you start young and explaining and working with the consumers what can be done, then it becomes an innate habit. I mean, again, coming from a personal experience, I used to go to my children's home in San Francisco. I mean, they don't live in San Francisco anymore since the pandemic. And they have like 4 recycle bins in their kitchen. And, San Francisco apartments are small. And I'm like, what the hell are all this? And they say, oh, because each one is to recycle something. I'm like, this is great, And so this is the kind of things that is so innate to them, but can be very challenging to somebody who is not used to that kind of a program.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a completely different way of thinking about waste and also what we use. It was very interesting in the last 2 years at CES. We've seen a big focus from a lot of the large technology companies around packaging, which isn't necessarily, I mean, e-waste, right? That is a topic I would expect, but even just like the packaging that the product comes in and how to recycle, it's, I wouldn't have expected to necessarily have the inspiration from that perspective, but I think it goes to, Chris and Joy, we just never know where we're going to see that inspiration and to get ideas that we can kind of take back and actually implement. So Chris, I'll ask you the same question as Joy, right? What technologies are you seeing power, green consumption in China?
Well, it's a very important question to ask for Alibaba. Well, technology is at the center of everything we do. Alibaba Cloud is an excellent example of how we leverage our technology for our partners. Every e-commerce transaction is powered by cloud computing. Last Double 11, we reduced cloud computing resources by 50% year over year through cloud native technologies. The Olympics is another great example of green tech. As a worldwide Olympic partner since 2017, we helped the Olympic Games transition into a digital era. For the first time, Alibaba Cloud migrated the core operation system of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympic Games to the cloud. Because of the new cloud-based broadcast distribution, the Beijing Olympic Games saw nearly 40% reduction of on-site broadcast personnel saving compared to the last winter game. So we see technology can continue to play big roles, from operation standpoint, from raising the awareness standpoint, from how to connect brands with sensitive consumers in a more effective way. So that's what we'll continue to do with our technology.
I think it just goes to show you, Chris, right, just how many opportunities there are And, whether it's through the supply chain, whether it's through cloud computing, whether it's even just through education of the consumer. And that, I think, is what's so exciting from an Alibaba perspective. Jue, what green lessons have you learned from your experience in China that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that the consumers are asking for it. I mean, you always think that anything that is to do with the environment and, anything that is a little bit more esoteric, sometimes might be an idea that comes from the West. And I find that in the West, what has happened is that you almost have to shout it from the mountaintop before they can kind of differentiate between the noise and the facts, because everybody is having some sort of symbol on their packaging. It's very difficult for someone to decipher sometimes. But in China, the consumers are basically asking, and we get questions from customer service through our distributor, just asking is, what is your ESG policy? Which initially, when we got those questions, we thought it was a little bit strange, primarily because we thought that, the concerns would be more about the quality of the product, the functionality. But for that question to be some of the top questions that's being asked shows that this is no longer a nice to have. These are table stakes. Companies that kind of comes through thinking that I can make this a marketing messaging is actually fooling ourselves. We actually need to now make it as part of who we are, because consumers can vote with their wallet share and their mind share. And if you don't conform to what they are thinking and what they want, they can easily pivot to somebody else, because it's much easier to do that than to try to convince a brand to do the right thing.
Now, that's very helpful. And I'll just, we have one more question and I'll ask the audience. We've got a few questions in the queue, but if you have anything that you'd like to ask, please just use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So Chris and Julie, I'll leave it kind of for both of you. Any words of advice to the audience on what to consider when they're beginning their green journey? So if you're at the very beginning, right, where should you think about starting, and how do you kind of take ownership of that versus kind of leaving that to the products that you're buying or the companies that you work for? How can you as a consumer have an impact?
Chris, do you want to start? You always have words of wisdom, so I'll let you start and I can think through it. Thank you. Well, it's a positive note I want to deliver to all the partners on our platform, because what I'm seeing from the trends that's happening on our platform is sustainability is not just a part for our corporate social responsibility. It's a way to drive growth, because I'm seeing sustainability to be a key driver to stimulate the demand. So, we are all challenged by some growth, opportunity there, in today's tech economy, but sustainability is the opportunity to embrace, to be able to build a strong brands that consumer will like, and really attractive product offerings with eco-friendly features that consumers are really looking for. So it's obvious from all the data we see. It's a way to drive consumption, to drive demand, because consumers are waiting for it, they're looking for it. So guys, just put more effort, really think about how to innovate, from a green point of view, and we are all gonna benefit from it because consumers really demand it. No, I have really nothing much more to add, but to say that it is a smart business decision, right? I mean, if you think about it, it used to be like I was just saying earlier, it used to be a marketing messaging. Today is part of your company's DNA. And I think all of us can start from the smallest piece, which is what you do personally, and then you translate that into what you do in the company. And collectively, there's this saying, right, little drops make the ocean. And that is how I think we all can make a difference. And it is a little bit almost like a drug. The more you do it, the better you feel. And the better you feel, you want to do it more of it. And so I think as a population and as a community, it can be very gratifying.
I think the community aspect is really critical. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Chris. So we're going to transition. We have quite a few questions in the queue. Once again, if you'd like to ask a question, please just drop it in at the bottom of the screen. All right, so we'll kick things off. Hi, Chris. I'm a journalist for the newswire AFP. what were the key learnings of the carbon emissions labeling pilot on Tmall? Who is responsible for the labels and was there independent auditing? Do you plan to roll out this carbon labeling feature to include most retailers on Tmall? Quite a few parts to that question, Chris, but we'll leave it for you.
Yeah, it's a journey. We're early on this journey, but we do have the team in place with a broad inclusion of the industrial experts sitting in the panel with us. So what we will have to do as a platform company is really build a credible infrastructure to support the green consumption, including the standardization, certification of green labeling, building of green shelf, and supported with the right traffic and really motion to make sure we spotlight the right product and so on. So it's a whole system that we're building. We're still in the process, but as I mentioned, we have a stronger or more robust standard in the home appliances electronic category today. But we're working on industry experts to build credible standards into the labeling system for other categories. It's in the process right now, but it's the goal is really to build credibility. So both the merchants and the consumers has the right standard to refer to. And we also are building a green footprint accounts for brands and for consumers. So it's kind of an achievement system that we're building. So by following the right standard for your purchase consumption, you will be able to accumulate that green points in a credible way. So those are all the important parts of the ecosystem that we're building right now.
Great, thank you. And as we look at the next question, which is also for Chris, this is from Allison. Thank you, Allison. Do you expect to see more brands ramping up the supply of sustainable products to Chinese consumers at 618 versus last year? And then Jue, I'll turn it over to you to just see what, kind of what Olaplex is doing. But Chris, if you can kick us off there.
What is the question again? I lost the signal a little bit.
Yep. Do you expect to see more brands ramping up the supply of sustainable products to Chinese consumers at 618 versus a year ago?
Yeah. This year, we will continue to promote sustainability by leveraging our unique role as a platform operator. So we started out with the double event last year. So this year, we're going to continue to focus more on green consumption throughout the year, including the June 18 promotion, of course. So consumers will be able, with the help with all the merchants by offering us more green products, we will be able to spotlight more and offer more to our consumers. So that's something we are committed to do.
Great.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if you can talk about your plans as well for 618, and then even just for the year, what are some of the changes that you've made year on year?
So for 618, like we've done in 1111, what we've done this time is to actually make it clearer down to a unit savings in terms of carbon footprint, greenhouse gas, as well as water saved. And we find that by doing that, it becomes more personalized. And we will continue to kind of help document and be able to quantify that. And then more importantly, when we are creating kits for China, we are trying to always look at what we call virtual bundles rather than really cardboard boxes bundles. Because when you start doing that, you think of how advanced a lot of the technology and the digital footprint is. You can use a QR code and have a lot of the information already uploaded onto their mobile phones. So there's no need. Primarily when people used to have boxes was because they wanted to read the instructions and understand what it's about. So with all of that, we find that consumers are actually more thankful because the first thing you do is you throw away the box. So with virtual bundles, that actually would be a very powerful statement for us to make, because individual boxes is one thing. To have a kit box that you can eliminate is a much bigger carbon footprint that you save.
That's really interesting. I think the QR codes do go a long way to educating the consumer and just the opportunities beyond that as well. So thank you. So this is questions for both Chris and Jue. What are the challenges around promoting green consumption in China?
I'll take that, very quickly. Because we were late to the game, we only started in China. This would be our second 618 and will be our third 1111, so to speak, as we go in to the anniversary of our time in China. And because we started late to the game, we've never had an issue as to how to communicate, because that was already demanded of brands. So I think we've been fortunate in that. And plus the fact that as a brand, we are only about going into our 8th year. And when we started, the whole ESG programming and the sustainability was really core to who we are.
That's great.
Well,
Chris?
For me, I'm seeing quite a lot of questions and challenges about the profitability for going green, both for merchants and for the platform. Well, the answer to that, I believe, is by doing good, we can do well. It's not a binary choice of impact versus profits. We see business opportunities to co-create a more sustainable future with our merchants and brands. So we believe that our users, partners, and investors also know that we will create greater value for all stakeholders. So we see clear demand signals from the consumers for green products, as I mentioned. So this is not just a push from the supply side. It's a significant business opportunity for brands. So I think we will need to just be innovative, as we always are, in driving the green consumption.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think that, and I know there's so many questions in the queue, but we're reached our time today. And I think that we've learned so much from hearing from both Chris and Jue in terms of not only what you as a consumer can do, but what you as a retailer or a brand in terms of collaborating and coordinating with Alibaba and some of the other platforms, whether it's around how your product is distributed, the cloud that you choose, or even around kind of education of the consumer, so that they're buying a product meaningful to them and that they understand what that is. And so not only will they use it as long, probably take better care of it along the way, but they also feel a different relationship with the brand as well. And lastly, I think just even having the two of you on this call, we see what opportunities there are in terms of brands and retailers coordinating with the platforms around education, around data that's really given to the consumer so that they know the impact of what they've done, and then around these shopping festivals like 618 and 1111, so that we can all kind of come together and have this very clear message to the consumer. So I want to very much thank Jue and thank Chris. I want to thank the audience for all of your great questions, and we'll follow up with you for those of you who didn't have the chance to get to today. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.